The Wachowski brothers originally felt that if we're going to tell the story, we should finish it. We should tell the next 2 chapters. And this ends. This story ends at the end of Revolutions. I mean, can the guys go on? Sure, they can do whatever they want, but this story ends at Revolutions. And they felt, look, we're bringing everybody back together again, and we're going to build these sets and make these clothes and get these actors together. We might as well just tell the whole story.
The Big Bang at the head of revolutions, I believe, was about the sort of the beginning of consciousness in machines, and the fabric of the millions of particles that flew past after the Big Bang were fractal in form, which we decided would be a good representation of, the single-cell organism floating in the sea at the beginning of life on Earth.
When the 2 scripts came in, Reloaded and Revolutions, it became very clear that it was just one movie that was just cut in half. And I mean, the way it was made was that people always say you shot them back to back. Well, it really wasn't back to back, because on a given day you'd be shooting a scene from, Reloaded, and then the next hour you'd be shooting a scene from Revolutions, then back to Reloaded and Revolutions. So, I mean, the whole picture was made as one movie. And from the very beginning, we wanted to show them as close together as we could make them, because the movie ends Reloaded beyond a cliffhanger. It ends right in the middle of a scene. And we thought the audience would be desperate to see the rest of the story. We thought our fans would say, we want to see the rest of the movie right away. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be great to show them both in the same summer? But we just couldn't get the visual effects done. The visual effects in Revolutions are far more complicated than Reloaded. And they just needed as much time as possible, so we pushed the thing to the fall. But still, it is one movie that you'll see in 2 halves.
I think people loved the first Matrix so much. And, it's hard to go to the movies and really be turned on and, like, visually, emotionally, spiritually, auditorily, every way. I mean, the movies just do that for you. And, that's why we all love making them, because we know that that is the truth of them.
I had such a great experience working with them the first time, and part of that experience was just the trust in their storytelling.
I was moved by the writing of it. I know that I was moved by the relationship between Trinity and Neo. I know that I was really moved by the potential for what everybody in Zion goes through, and that I felt that if they were successful in really illuminating how the real people, the people who live in the real world, are dealing with the threat coming from machine world, that could be something really emotionally powerful.
We actually get to see the real confrontation. Like, this is it. This is going to be the takedown. One of us is going to win, and one of us is going to lose, and that's at least what you believe going into it. And you get to see that people really fighting for their lives at this point.
What is a train station? A location between 2 other locations. It functions as it's a realm of the programs. Programs that are moving in the matrix use the Millwall Avenue train station as a crossover. I guess from being part of the machine world structure to the matrix. Programs escape into the matrix, where they're liberated, which I find lovely.
It was very sad, like when we found out that Gloria had passed away, and then for Larry and Andy it became very difficult how how to explain to have essentially the one Oracle in Reloaded and then have a completely different person in Revolutions.
When she died, it was immediately apparent to anybody who read the scripts that that potentially was a structurally, significant blow to the production. In that, well, for several reasons. One, she is that character. Her original performance is fantastic in the first movie. She's indelible in that performance, and trying to do that performance any other way without her seems hard to imagine.
They reached out to Mary Alice, who played with Gloria Foster in New York for 2 years in a show called Having Our Say, where they played sisters who lived to be 100 and some odd years old. And they were brilliant together.
Gloria died in September, and Mally Finn called me December 9th, 2001. She said the brothers wanted to fly me out to Australia within the week to audition. Everything that has a beginning has an end. I got the job.
Do it again? Don't hit me.
Brother, don't put me through.
Mary Alice comes in and does an amazing job of presenting a living, breathing oracle. She's somebody I worked with on my very first professional gig when I was 10 years old.
I played his mother in a play in New York. I had seen Lawrence through the years, but this was the first time we had actually worked together. It was wonderful. Nice. I just wish that I wish Andy and Larry had written the scene just between Morpheus and the Oracle.
One of the elements of the film is that also programs are seeking to be freed from being deleted as programs for the machine city, I guess. Which is funny that, the humans are supposed to be free in the Matrix, but they're really imprisoned. And programs that were developed by AI programs are now trying to escape because of deletion or other kinds of situations, like the Merovingian, who have gained their own autonomy, are now using the Matrix as a free place to exist. You generally have good and bad, right? Sometimes in a kind of normal drama. This one starts with that, it was the machines and humans, and, humans being trapped in the Matrix. And the depiction of the machines was as a kind of evil. And then I think as the ideas kind of develop in the film, I feel, they kind of you don't have that anymore. They kind of give you the perspective of the machines trying to survive, of programs trying to survive, of humans trying to survive, right? And I think that it's kind of, and then it goes into the evolution of entities trying to survive, and in the way that they survive. In the beginning, it was more often Larry during the Matrix who would come up, and then Andrew eventually during the course of it would speak, and then until finally now they both participate in direction, and but they I remember they would just learned how to say that was good. How about this time? Just to kind of give you that kind of like that was good. Now as opposed to no other kind of contact except, can you do this or can you do that? A kind of more, what they would say, coddling relationship. I know they've responded to how I work. Sometimes they used to just direct me every time. Sometimes now they'll let me just do another take. And with other actors, depending on what they're doing, we'll, help them with either an idea to think about while they're doing the line, or to, you know, give them metaphors and analogies, you know, do it like this or pretend it like that, you know, which are things that they weren't really, you know, they've gained a real facility at.
I had seen some of the first film. I hadn't seen all of it because my kids were fascinated by it. But when I was offered the role, or when I had to come in and go in and test for it, I had to quickly get it and have a look at it. And you realise that there's a style of performance, there's a world in which these people live in, which is completely different to the real world, and therefore you actually have to immerse yourself in it.
I've worked with Bruce Spence, who played the train man, on a commercial once here in Australia. But, you know, he's like one of the doyens of the Australian film industry. He was like in the second Mad Max, Mad Max 2, where he played the gyro pilot. But he's also been in like an enormous amount of Australian films, Stalk and I think like The Last Wave, and he's a very well-known person in Australia. And a great character.
There's somewhere between like 144 and 150 sets. There's more than, even if you divided it by 2 and said 70 sets per film, that's a lot of sets for a film to have.
Basically, we built the third railway station first, which is 2 platforms, and then we built one side of that in to be the 1 platform station, and then we reskinned that to be Mobile Avenue, so that there's 3 layers to it. When we finish as Mobile Avenue, we take 1 layer off, put some floating walls in, change the colour, and there you go, you've got a second railway station. This station's a construct, as in the first film where Neo and Trinity go into a construct to get their guns to go into the hotel lobby. Also where Morpheus and Neo fight in the dojo is a construct. But this construct's a little different in that this is made by the Merovingian, whereas the other constructs are made by the crews of the ships to do their training in.
For the central characters, especially Neo, for him to get from one world to this other world, he has to go through the train man. The train man is kind of like, if people are familiar with their mythology, he's kind of like the ferryman crossing the River Styx. Every culture has its sort of genre of storytelling. Japanese films have their samurai films, and ours we have the epic stories of Shakespeare, etc. But if we look at the commonality of all these stories, they're all essentially mythological. They're all the great journeys that human beings need to go through in order to find themselves, in order to explore various elements of their psyche and all those fears. And it seems to me that this film and the Terminator films, the Mad Max films, the Star Wars films, even the Fellowship of the Ring and all those sorts of stories, they're all essentially mythological. And they're all those previous films that I mentioned are also mythological. Human beings need these sorts of stories to be told.
When people speak about the Wachowski brothers as directors and filmmakers, people often say, well, you know, they've got it all mapped out. You know, they know exactly what they want.
Everybody likes to think of filmmakers or anybody as preconceiving everything. And there's something in our culture that asks an artist or anybody in charge they have to have known beforehand. What did they know? They must have known all this in their heads beforehand. You don't know it.
Oftentimes we'll come to a scene and it's not storyboarded. It's always, you know, either Andrew or Larry, you know, with the camera, you know, oftentimes it's Larry with a finder and Andrew at the monitor. And they find the scene.
You don't know until the day you show up. That's why people are constantly coming up to Larry and Andy and saying, what's going to happen in this shot? And they say, give me the viewfinder and give me the actors, and I'll tell you what's going to happen in this shot.
It's not like all the time that they know every shot, they know exactly. But they know, they have a sense of what they want to do. They're just waiting sometimes to see it.
There's no such thing as preconception, and there's no such thing as pre-visualization. Those are only tools that get you to what you're actually doing, which is making the movie.
When I was talking to Larry and Andy one day, we were doing something, I think we were doing the coat check fight. And I asked if I could appear with just this suit on. And Larry was saying, well, you know, in The Matrix, it's like the jacket. We like the jacket because it's sort of like armor. So when he described it to me in that way and explained it to me in that way, I was able to go, okay, great, because that makes sense. You go into The Matrix, you're entering into this world where you need to have your defenses up.
Something else takes over. It starts when I put the clothes on, actually. And I guess I've been playing her for long enough that just something happens. I mean, I change so drastically. I look and I go, who is that? Who is that girl? That ain't me.
They wanted everybody to have the feeling that they're like bat people or whatever, that they could just walk up the walls and walk on the ceilings. But they didn't want to turn the set upside down. They wanted to do it real time so you could see gravity, gun shells coming out, debris falling. Everything was falling the proper direction. So I basically gave that set over to Glenn Boswell and his guys, and they put together these small overhead tracks.
The track that we're actually using, which is just up in the ceiling here, is it's actually a yachting track. And the cars that we use on this particular track are designed to run freely with ball bearings, so we can pull them and move them quite quickly along the track. And we can configure them with pulleys for our flying systems, or with single dropper lines so that we can be fixed.
All the guys up in there were all stunt players, and I'm not going to say all the stunt people were great actors. What can I tell you? They all died good. This particular thing was a lot of movement, a lot of running. They were wearing masks. There was running and firing, and things were going like that. And it was perfect for them. There was no reason to put an actor in there.
It was similar to the club scene in the first film, whereas I think the club scene in the first film is more you sort of suited a place that Trinity might meet up with Neo in the first film, whereas I think the club hell scene in this film is very much an extension of the Merovingian's perverseness, I suppose. It was a fetish club scene, so we had a lot of people in latex, and it was a bit more hardcore, I suppose, if you like. A lot of people with tattoos and piercings and bit S&M. We had some extremely funny characters in there.
We wanted to have a high-end fetish feeling, but we wanted to also carry through the idea of, if you think of a Bosch painting of hell, there are certain elements of the people painted in those paintings where they have animal-like heads or feet, or, there's kind of a melding of the human and the inhuman. We wanted to give that feeling, so it wasn't just like a general club, but it wasn't too much in the fantasy realm.
It was a difficult scene to shoot that, actually. We had 3 days to shoot it. We had to get Trinity and Morpheus and the Merovingian, and Persephone was there, and I think it was the first time you meet the train man, or sort of become apparent of how the train man fits into whole jigsaw puzzle. And yeah, it was a good scene.
Both of them, we wanted to have the feeling of fairy tale characters. So I looked back into kind of iconoclastic images for evil, bad people. And also kind of, we wanted it, obviously it's the Hell Club, but we wanted the feeling of fantasy, hardcore fantasy feeling. So to have them as the king and queen of hell, but also kind of like, a Snow White feeling was good for giving us evil in rubber.
I've always wanted to come and check the sets before, check the restaurant, check the nightclub, the chateau, to see how much of a king he was, how grand he was. For instance, this set, once it was filled with all the people in it, help. I mean, the whole thing helps the actor tremendously. The notion of the underworld, and at the same time, the flashiness of the places that he decides to surround himself with, it says a lot about who he is.
That's one of the things that I love so much about Trinity is just her complete and total commitment to the love that she has for Neo and the belief that she has in Neo. And she's, not going to be told that, she can't do something, or that she's not going to wait around to see what happens. She's very proactive, as we know. So she goes in there and finds a way. The circumstances of the film and the dire situation that the world of the Matrix is in forces her to show up and be even more of a warrior this time around. The difference being that she's in love and she has a partner, and that has to change someone. And I think it softens her in a way, and strengthens her as well.
People associate the Matrix essentially, like we were saying before, like with kung fu and action and a certain degree of violence and but yeah, it's a love story. It's a good love story actually. It sort of propels the film along.
I love the relationship that they have. It's like I only wish it could go farther. I think it's pretty special. She's so different than the first movie, but I'm so different than I was in the first movie, so that's bound to happen. I guess we're cast so well that you can see Neo's journey, and you can see it on Keanu, and you can see Lawrence's journey, and you can see it on Lawrence. Okay, Hugo, no. We're never going to see that because Hugo's just such a darn beautiful, gorgeous, lovely, kind human being. I can't imagine anyone else playing the roles that we play.
I was already aware of his work, you know, in the movies. And of course, you know, whenever you work with a movie star, you feel a little, you know, I think, you know, you can't help but feel a little nervous, you know. But he's also, you know, but he's an actor. So working with him was, you know, like working with the other actors.
They have a real formalization of language which is based in intellect and emotion. And it's a kind of, which comes across in behavior as well. It's very concentrated and very specific and just compressed where there's no extraneous flourishes or additions. It's really like pure idea, pure gesture, pure thought, specific. And it's a real kind of writing tradition of like, you start with an idea, a proposition, you know, and then it starts to build through the addition of ideas and thought, you know, and to lead you to the ultimate place of what I want to say. You need to know this first. This is where I came from. This is what's happened. This is what's going to happen. And all of their scenes kind of do that. They come up with a dilemma or an idea or a place, even with an introduction, and they kind of really lead you there, because they want you to understand and they want to communicate. There's no kind of hiding or anything like that.
I was, you know, not a big science fiction fan, but there was something about the movie that I found very spiritual, and I didn't really, you know, think a lot about it, but that I was able to go with the story. First of all, I had to get used to two directors. I've never had two directors, and I had to get used to their way of communicating. Their, you know, to me as an actor, and I just sort of let myself be open to their suggestions and their notes.
They're writers. They wrote it. And I think in working with writers who direct, there is another element there, because I think they hear it. They hear it because they wrote it. So when they wrote it, and I've you know, a lot of directors will do this. They'll mouth, when you watch a director watch a monitor, they'll mouth the lines that the actors are doing, you know? And there's a thing of like, they want to hear it, they want to see it.
Acting is a lot of being able to believe and accept, you know, the circumstances that you're given, the language that you're given, whatever the character is about. You have to be able to accept that, and you have to be able to lend your instrument to that.
the Oracle takes on a much more important role in this, and you get to see the Oracle for who she is, I suppose, which is another program with her own agenda. So we did shoot a lot. There were a lot of like important scenes between like her and Neo, and re-establishing that relationship and what that meant. But there was also a lot of important stuff between Sati and Seraph, and also Smith, who eventually, becomes one with the Oracle.
It was a really interesting question that we talked about, and the whole thing was to do with individuality, and the Smiths are meant to be all the same, and yet do you dissipate the energy of Smith for a viewing audience if there isn't one central Smith? Does the viewer really want there to be one central, extremely bad Smith that they can kind of focus on, or what works better? What works better from an audience point of view? And we talked about that quite a lot. Originally, in the script, there were a couple of scenes which were pretty interesting because they revealed that the Smiths weren't necessarily working in concert, that there were times where they were fighting with each other. For instance, one Smith would start speaking, another Smith would start finishing his sentence, and the third would actually finish it, and then the first Smith would say, "Why don't you just let me finish, just for once," So that actual scene had to go for I think for reasons of money, because every time you get more than one Smith on the screen, it costs an enormous amount of money to do head replacements. And there were a couple of other scenes like that which went for that reason, I think. So this whole question of whether all the Smiths are exactly the same or whether there are differences amongst them, it's pretty interesting, I think. As the Smiths take over various people in the film, there are Smiths who take over more powerful characters like the Oracle, who then take on the Oracle's power. So the Oracle Smith became the most powerful Smith. The Oracle Smith became more powerful than the original Smith. And then later on, when Smith takes over Neo, that Smith, for a very, very brief period of time, becomes the all-powerful.
The first time I played a scene and Smith emerged from me, it was just a rehearsal before we actually shot the scene. And at that stage, I wasn't sure how many people on the crew were aware of the Bain-Smith relationship. And as soon as Smith's voice came out of me, there was the chuckles around the room. People just sort of broke into spontaneous laughter, and I thought, they think I'm actually playing a joke and doing an impersonation. But I suddenly figured, oh, it's the first time they might be introduced to the fact as to who this guy is and who's taken him over. So it was interesting, yeah. And then it was a matter of, with each take, playing it a little bit more Smith or a little bit less Smith, just finding out the moments to have him coming through and emerging, or just hiding, creating the subterfuge.
This film is very different from Reloaded because it is rooted heavily in the real world as opposed to the Matrix. And that world has a very distinct dystopian, dark, dirty quality to it. Texturally, it is, decaying and rotting and really, is supposed to represent the aftermath of an apocalyptic time. In Zion, you still have some warm colors because it's very warm at the bottom where it's near the core of the earth. And so it's sort of that magma kind of feel to it. Then as you get into the tunnels, those have different qualities too. They're all blue shifted. It's very dark, but there's also different levels of mist and dripping things on the walls. Like it's warmer down near Zion, so you're going to get more of a warm, wet feeling. And then as you get closer to the surface, that's a colder feeling up there because the sky's been black and there's no sun there. And so most of the warmth has left the surface of the earth. Revolutions is a dark science fiction, heavy creature movie, in my opinion, and that was our major challenge, was to pull that off and to try to, at the very least, take it to an original place that hasn't been covered before.
When you're here amongst all of these grids or crosses of concrete, you would be kind of scared as well. Like, this is a threatening sort of place. You're outside your ship, you've got no protection except for a lightning gun probably, and here you are where any chance that sentinels might come pouring down on you at any moment.
Niobe is at the very beginning stages. And coming out of that I, me, myself train of thought, because she does have a lot of that, even though she would sacrifice everything for Zion. But she's going to do it her way. She's just a hard woman. She's a hard woman. But yeah, slowly but surely, she begins to kind of emerge from that rock.
The ability for people who can go into the Matrix, the jack that they have, I think puts them even more on the front line because they have to do battle really mentally. And I think that, quite frankly, Jason Locke resents the fact that he is unable to engage on that level in the Matrix. I think that he really wants to believe and all of the other stuff, but that he cannot. There's that character, the doubting Thomas, with the apostles after Christ has been resurrected, and he's the guy that says, let me touch his stigmata. I gotta see if this is for real. And there are people from time to time who are like that, but once those people are convinced, I think that you will find the most zealous and the most faithful among all of the believers, and I think that Locke is that kind of guy.
Leah, her work wasn't scheduled for a while. We were We're in pre-production in Australia, and we found out that her plane had been involved in an accident.
During the time period before I was cast and after she had died, I wondered, would I be called, because the first go-around had got down to she and I think. And so the thought was in my head, and I had already started feeling strange and, you know, just kind of out of sorts about it if the call did come. And when it did, you know, I was excited, but at the same time, it was bittersweet.
I always find it interesting meeting other actors, you know, just watch the way they work and how they think and how they're processing what they're doing in terms of coming to terms with their character. Clayton, I think, is going to go a long way. I mean, I mean, he looks good, but he's got a solidness in him that, in the way he approaches his work, that I think will make him go a long way.
This is the logos. This is where Ghost and Sparks and I get down. This is where we get down and dirty. And we are the smallest ship, the fastest ship, the best ship in the fleet.
You know, they're all of a similar ilk, all the ships. They all use the same battery power hovercraft electromagnetic pads for them to be able to move down the sewers. They all use the same basic idea of the modem to take you into the matrix, and they use the same communication skills and power. We'll change chair colours, we'll change some colours of the bezels on the screens. The visual graphics guys will change some of the graphics. We'll build some extra walls, and we have to be careful that we don't have to build a set of sets from scratch, if you like, for the number of scenes we've got to do in these new sets. So hence we rejig this. And we do that with a lot of sets, not just these ones.
The production becomes very art department driven at some point, because you have to shoot out a lot of sets in a short amount of time. So Owen's job is trying to give you a very user-friendly set that you can like shoot scenes out from both films and then move on, and we'll go to another stage, shoot another set, and this set will be sort of like, you know, being torn down as we're walking out the door or checking the gate, so we can keep, you know, perpetuating sets and, you know, keep the schedule.
There is something about Keanu that is of this world, but not of this world. Keanu is one of those people who, in some respects, you only get to witness their presence. You only get to watch. He is, again, deeply, deeply sensitive and keenly intelligent, and it's been just a real joy to sort of walk through this whole crazy experience with him.
During the end of the third movie, it's her beginning to surrender to the concept that there is something beyond the intellect, beyond logic, beyond her. Niobe believes in his abilities. I don't think she believes necessarily that he's the one until the very end of Matrix 3. And he's just proven to her over and over again, I don't know how many times it takes, but that I think she just thinks he's a good soldier and he gets the job done. And for that alone, she will support him because she respects that. You know what I mean? She respects that, and she will stand by anyone who is willing to do the things that Neo does and make the sacrifices that he chooses to make.
Smith's taken over the Matrix world in one respect by cloning himself, and he's having a good time in there. But he's by himself in the real world. And I think the thing was that with a computer system or a machine system, the world is very controlled. And all of a sudden, a computer program is inside a human being, and all those circuit breakers are gone. So he's experiencing the world from a totally different perspective. But I think he actually enjoys the fact that no one actually knows it's him, and he can sort of worm his way around unbeknownst to anyone.
I think it's a great part for an actor to actually come in and play yourself possessed by somebody else. Ian is incredibly fun and warm and sort of giving about the whole thing.
I always thought that the love that Neo and Trinity have, which takes place in the Neb and more so in Zion, is so important, obviously, to the story. But the love was so beautiful to me, and it had to be because the alternative is so bleak and so dark. The world that they're fighting in is so dismal and so horrific that within the room of their love had to be really pure and beautiful, and what, drives the fighting in a way, because in the first Matrix, Trinity's being driven by her purpose and her beliefs, and she still is being driven by those things, but couple that with love and the possibility of being in love and having this life.
There's a real love and appreciation. There's a real genuine affection that we have for one another. I have to say that he's completely dedicated to Neo. I mean, he's dedicated his life to Neo. He's given, more than... I don't know how he's managed to sort of put himself on hold to let this character live in the way that he has.
What's cool about the flight dynamics is this interesting electromagnetic attraction repulsion type system, and basically when the ship gets close to surfaces, it repels an opposite magnetic charge, and we're going to augment that with a nice little blanket, a cushion of electrostatic energy to light up the tunnel as it does that. First class blibbity blab. Is there any justification for anything?
I watched the first film over and over again, every scene that Hugo was in, watched his moves, his mannerisms, the timbre in his voice, his tempo. He had very particular rhythms for that character, and I just watched those scenes over and over again and studied them very closely and found myself eventually, I think, channeling Hugo. I've watched his work when I was an acting student and seen him do various performances on film, on stage, and I've always admired his work, which kind of made it easier to study his work when I was watching the first Matrix film, and also helped knowing his work so well when I had to do the character that he'd created. A machine or a computer program has everything organised and a sequence of events very, very well developed. But when he becomes human, that filter isn't there, that system of control isn't there. It's like this white noise of humanity that he's enveloped in. And he actually has to stop himself going a bit crazy because of that. The scene in the first film where he's interrogating Morpheus and he talks about how he hates the world that he's in and he hates the creatures he's existing with, i.e. humans. And all of a sudden he's become one and he's got to experience it, flesh and blood, in the real world. And he's managed to make a lot of observations about the human form, the human condition. And basically, yeah, it delivers that soliloquy which says, yep, I kind of figured as much about you humans, and now that I've experienced it for myself, my thoughts are the same. The lesser being, as he thinks. No wires, no special powers that the Matrix might provide. It's dirty, fighting dirty, using anything available. All in there, bits and pieces, sharp objects and hot things and, yeah, hard steel.
The action of 3 is almost traditional Western movie action.
We wanted to do an old-fashioned John Wayne fist fight, so how do we do it differently? How do we make it surprising and tie it into the Matrix. So we blew up, we shut up the cables and had sparks going off. So it's strobe lights all over the place. So the operators can't see the actual action. I think that Larry and Andy like to make things hard because it pleases them to see other people struggle for the answers, and it pleases them to watch a movie and know that it was hard for everybody. When they see rain sequences, they go, that day must have been really miserable for those filmmakers.
There's a scene in there where his eyes have been burnt by a sparking cable, and that's involved him having a eye prosthetic on, which essentially like covers his eyes, which is tricky, but it's also, you can see the humorous side of it as well. But yeah, sometimes you have problems with those things. We had a problem with it the other day where it wasn't so great for his eyes, and so luckily enough, after they have the initial, his eyes are all burnt, and, Larry and Andy decided that it would be too gruesome, to go through the final, epitaph of the film with him with these horribly scarred eyes. So now he has a bandage on it, which makes it a bit easier for us and for him.
There's this particular thing with my character. He's got a really large World War II style radio that he lugs around from place to place, and this particularly uncomfortable headset that he talks into to relay the messages to the troops. And I think if anything was to stand out most to me about doing this film is the relationship that I've built up between myself and the radio. We're quite close, and I find that I go home, I think about the radio, and
I remember when I read the script about the APUs, they explained them that they're these kind of robotic, mechanized fighting machines, which, I kind of felt, wasn't there a thing, a loader in Jim Cameron's Aliens that there was kind of like this? And they said, well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that, but it's a much different kind of device. It's an ectoskeleton almost. It allows the operator to sit inside a giant machine that can actually walk and move and shoot guns and spin around.
Originally, it was going to be 8 or 9 feet tall, and I ended up drawing it, making it this, what it's supposed to, like 16 feet tall, because I kept thinking that, if they're going to have this thing carrying guns around, it's basically like a tank. It should look pretty formidable.
It's 14 feet high. It weighs 2.5 ton, 3 ton, just to move it. And it's not articulated. It's not a robot in the sense that it moves, but it can be repositioned. It can be posed for various shots. Most of the time we'll see it'll always be a visual effect.
I think she feels very protective of Zion, as everybody who lives there does. And, she lost 2 brothers and, loved her family, and she loves Link, and Link is about all she's got left. And if their home is destroyed, then they're destroyed. And I think that, she just loves him so much that she wants to make sure that they can have a life together.
These things had to look like they're built out of other ships and rebuilt and restructured. And in the Mjolnir, I looked at a lot of like Panzer tanks, and I looked at it sort of based on an Aztec hammer. And I put these scales on it, or these big metal plates that they'd put on the sides of Panzers and stuff. I thought that was neat. And if on top of it, if you break them off, that gives extra detail because they're these plates that you could like break chunks off, like it broke, skidded against something. And those are the kind of things like, I know that they like, that texture and detail and stuff that, like when it would crashes into the dock, that stuff gets ripped off and gets, it gives them things to play with.
For her, it's all about strength, conquer, go get 'em, do what you gotta do, don't cry about it, just do it. And I remember reading in a script, her muscles start to bulge out as she turns the wheel, it turns as she steers the ship. So I said, I don't really have a lot of muscle. I need to. So then I started doing hardcore weight training with the martial arts.
The siege is a climactic confrontation between man and machine. There's a whole history, according to the brothers, that is repeating through time and thusly has confused all people who are conscious at the time as to what year it actually is. They think it's a particular year, but in fact it could be 5 times that length of time since the first war occurred. So the siege is potentially a reenactment of an event that's happened many times before. And the means by which the Sentinels eventually are able to permeate the dock are diggers.
Larry did a little sketch of what he thought it should look like, and that's what I worked from. And they described digging machines, and I called up mining companies to get information on mining equipment because there was a certain type of belt and tooth and stuff, the way it worked. And I worked on the idea that it was teeth, so I had some of them worn off. They looked like bicuspids and molars.
Each sentinel has 15 tentacles and 10 underarms and 10 arms or claws, and then like 32 sewing needles and 6 animatable eyes. The rules that we have to play with in this sequence are all real-world physics. So the challenge of it is that we have no real reference for any of this stuff because these machines don't exist.
Siege takes place in the dock, and there are several stages of the siege. There's the part where Mifune goes and rallies the troops, and it has one look, and then the Sentinels come in, and the group of Sentinels do massive destruction to the dock and knock out all the lights. That has another look, which is much more medieval, with lit entirely by firelight from the bunkers and things blowing up. And then there's a third type of lighting which occurs after Morpheus and Niobe land and hit the EMP, which knocks out all the electricity whatsoever, and so even the sub-levels below have no light, no interior light, and they have to rely on generators, so they quickly string up bulbs, and we have a bad generator sort of look.
For the siege, to cover our heroes, Z and Chara, getting from one point to another, we've had to provide some kind of physical sets. So there's been the interior ducts, which are, basically interior tubes. They're like concrete and steel tubing that our heroines can run through. They can come down ladders, various pieces. They can go off to the left and they can go off to the right. Basically giving them a geography for them to be able to get from one part of the dock, if you like, to another part of the dock as an interior. And then at various points they are able to exit the interiors and go into exterior sets.
We're jumping through these tunnels and we're landing, and it was really a little more strenuous than I thought it would be. I just love how crazy that siege scene is. It's just so much action going on.
It was like being in the ultimate PlayStation game, you know? You were actually in the game. It was every young boy's and older guys' fantasy.
I think all of us started out on attacking this with the idea that we want to shoot as much as we can. That's always the first order of business, is you want to get as much in camera as you can.
What we tried to do was set up an area in which you could shoot a scene and more or less own the scene. And then for a couple of shots you could turn around, shoot back, shoot into the green screen, which would be obviously a visual effect. But we're trying at least to give the visual effects a bit of a break and be able to shoot the dialogue scene and own the background, if you like.
Things that we weren't quite sure about were big destruction moments, okay, like any of the battle, the siege battle, all the heavy destruction elements in there. That's kind of what dictated how the miniature solution came into the equation. Was we could always just build miniatures for these select areas of the dock. We decided to blend a lot of different methodologies. So we use miniatures, we have computer graphics, Sentinels, computer graphics, APUs. There are live action APUs with some set pieces. We had like piles and piles of dead Sentinel carcasses, which were a collaboration between VFX and art and the design of that. So it's a real mishmash of real art-directed physical objects, actors, digital creatures, miniatures, all that.
It's crazy. I knew it was an action film, but I didn't really expect that there would be quite so much action activity, you know. It's sort of challenging physically. There's one particular scene which I found just really, it was a real struggle physically. I kind of went home, like literally bruises everywhere and chafes, and apparently quite a lot of people have had, you know, sore bits and pieces.
In the battle, we're pitting something like 99 of these armored personnel units against about 15,000 Sentinels at any one time. We did some tests where we filled the dock in CG with just different amounts of Sentinels. At one point, we had 26,000 Sentinels in there, and it was pretty much like pea soup. You couldn't even move through the thing. So we actually shrank those numbers down just so there would be some maneuvering room. The implication is that there's actually a lot more, and you sort of sense that, but it's still, that's a pretty phenomenal number of creatures to sort of keep track of, animate, render, light, make look like every one of them is doing the right thing.
The Sentinel's been probably the most complicated character I've ever rigged up, because the tentacles have to be able to wrap around objects, have to be able to wave around like a rope, and have to be able to grab items and hang on to it and throw it around.
Because of the way they move, because of the squid-like nature and the flowing nature of the tentacles and the fact that they fly, people thought that they were underwater. And so we're